This week, as we finish the first broad strakes, we'll steam in a couple new frames up forward, and then get ready to move on with blanking. As we mentioned at the end of last week's episode, while I was in the boathouse finishing the first portside broad strake, Kira and Steve were outside selecting some more oak to use for the second strakes. Once we got them inside, they were further cut down. Later, we were going to take them back to the sawmill to get roughly thickness before they go through the planer. Meanwhile, the portside broad strake was ready and I got that painted and oiled and we fastened it the next morning. We've been moving right along here on the planking, and it is really fantastic to start seeing Arabella's shape come through. Even with just these two strakes that we have on right now, the garboard and the first broad strake, it is really amazing to look down the boat and actually see their curves coming out. So we'll be continuing with that, but in this episode, we're actually going to take a quick detour, which is going to make things a lot easier for us. So I'm up at the bow here, right above the forefoot, and this is where our main mast is going to step. So the mast is going to come through the deck here and step onto a mast step right onto the centerline here. And it's going to get bolted down with these two centerline bolts that we have. And as you astute observers have noticed, we are missing a few frames down the boat, including right in this area. Most of them down the boat are where we have molds. And so the molds need to stay in the boat until we have all of the planking on and we have a couple of deck beams in. And the reason for that is that the molds give the boat its shape. So if we were to take these all out right now and try to plank with only the frames that are in, they would actually not be strong enough. They have enough give to them that the planking would start to pull everything inwards and we would lose the shape of the boat. So these are going to stay in for a little while longer and we will have to steam in some frames a little down the line. But right now we're going to steam in this pair right here because we've realized as we're planking that we do need a little something here. The planks are starting to pull up a little bit and it would be great to have something to attach them to. So we have a little bit to figure out here, and that is what I've been working on recently. So, how do we steam frames in after the fact? These frames are actually not going to get pockets into the keel like all the other ones. And that is totally normal. Both ways are completely acceptable. And oftentimes many boats are framed completely without pockets and many people argue against them, but that is something completely different. So what we are doing right now is we're going to have to jam these frames in so that they don't move when we're steaming them. And basically that requires us to shape the butt ends of them. So what I have been doing is figuring out templates that are going to show us the shape of the heel end of the frame, and we're going to have to shape those before we steam them in. They will then get wedged into place we're going to drill a couple holes through the planks here and put a couple deck screws in to hold them in, and then they will get steamed in, and we'll have ribbons just like we had before and clamp everything into place and let them dry before we start fastening. So before we can start steaming these two frames in, we're actually going to build a smaller steam box. And the reason is we only have 2 frames to do. It doesn't really make much sense for us to start up the big steamer. That's gonna take a lot of water, a lot of energy, a lot of firewood just for the 2 frames. Doesn't really make much sense. So another way to do it is you can make a little steam box out of PVC pipe. So we got a 4-inch round PVC pipe that is 10 feet long, which would be plenty enough for our 2 frames. And we're just gonna put a cap on the end, put a hose in there, and then get a little boiler going with a little wood plug on the other end so that we can open that up and pull the frames in and out. So the other thing we need to do today is figure out how to cut this angle for the butt of the frames. Yesterday, while Steve was fastening off the port side broad strake, I made a couple patterns to try to figure out this angle, which is going to be a compound angle since the boat gets wider as it goes towards the stern from the bow, and as it tapers down to go to the bottom of the keel. We need to figure out what those angles look like. So basically, I made a pattern for the front edge of the frame and a pattern for the aft edge of the frame, lined them up on a board and cut that angle and check to make sure that that works. It took me a little bit to try to get that in there. It's a little bit fiddly, but it definitely works. So I've got these patterns, and I just made a couple more for the starboard side, and we're gonna try to get these cut onto the framing stock that we have and get right to steaming those and putting them in. It was quick enough to just use the power planer to cut this piece, rather than to try to manipulate the end of the frame through the bandsaw. After a bit of back and forth, the first frame was fitting well, so it was on to the second one. Now hold on there.
Alright, I'm holding.
Another little task we have to take care of here.
Yep, you got it.
Before we switch from oak to cedar planking, as we move up the boat, the planer would need to be raised so that we would be able to run much longer boards through the machines. Some of them are over 20 feet long. Are we on it good?
Yeah, we're on it.
There we go. Yeah, it feels warm. It's not super hot, but...
Yesterday we got a little steam box made because we just have to steam these pair of frames, and it's not really worth firing up the giant steamer just to do the 2 of them. So we set that up yesterday, and Alex got the end of these frames notched so that they'll nestle down really well between the planking and the center line.
Before steaming, you would need to split the frames. The plan had been to do this on the smaller bandsaw, so that we didn't have to switch the blade on the big bandsaw. But it wasn't quite up for the challenge.
I'm having a hard time, this thing's walking on me.
Yeah. So we had to pause to replace the blades on the big bandsaw before moving on.
Should be fine. I haven't messed with the tilting adjustment since we first set the saw up.
After getting the ribbons in place and letting the steamer heat up for a while, it was time to throw in the first frame.
And inside, is that?
Yeah.
We planned on letting the frame steam for about 2 hours, so there was plenty of time to take care of a few odd jobs here and there, such as fixing Casey's brush hog.
How long has this been in?
Almost 2 hours.
Oh, okay, so it should be pretty soft.
Yeah. And then I've got the sledgehammer and the stone crusher up here. So it should be good. And it's marked.
Yep, that's right.
Feels hot enough.
Yeah, it is quite warm.
Where she needs to be.
Yeah, maybe you need to come in. Yeah, there you go.
I'll start clamping that one down there.
All right.
We need to worry about where against it.
Our little PVC steamer we made worked great today. The only issue we had with it is it got a little hot and the PVC got a little bit floppy. I think if we had put like a 2x6 underneath it to support it, it would have remedied that issue. But other than that, it worked like a champ. We took the first frame out and that bent in without a hiccup, so that was awesome. And then we went to bend in the second one and unfortunately it snapped on us.
A crack, did you say?
Oh shit! There's a very big crack.
Big crack. Yeah, that's.
All right, pop her out. We'll have to try again another day.
I don't have another frame milled up.
Okay. We got a little bit of footage of that, but not some amazing footage because unfortunately, Alex had a doctor's appointment that he had to go to, so he wasn't around for that breaking on us. But we did have the GoPros running, so at least we got a little bit of it. So that busted on us, which kind of sucked, but I remembered that we had one of the culled frames we had hung on to because the reason we culled it was some defects, but it was really high up in the frame, and that one had been a midship. So since this was so much farther forward, that defect would end up above the shear and get cut off. So I recharged the steamer and got that ready while the two volunteers we had here today, Marty and Casey, cut off and shaped the end of it so it would fit between the garboard and the center line, and that one steamed in really well. So that was good. And while we were waiting for that one to cook, we planed down the planks that we had the mill resaw for us. So now the next broad strakes are all ready to go, so we can start scarfing those up tomorrow. We're laying out the timber and figuring out how we want to scarf it together, and there's a few things that we're taking into consideration for that. One is up forward here where the stem is. We're doing nibs on the ends of the planks, so this next plank, it has to have a little almost wedge on the bottom edge of it to fit into that nib. So as you can see, we have a plank here that gets wider at the end, and that was from the base of the tree where there's a natural curve and sweep to the grain. And we want to, if we can, use that curve and that sweep to kind of flow down into where that nib is so that that'll be stronger and less likely to break off. Another thing we're trying to do is make sure that we land the scarfs where there aren't existing scarves. So I put a little tape here marking the fore and aft edge of the scarf. And we want to make sure that when we scarf the next plank up that we don't land above that or immediately adjacent to it. We want to try to spread those scarves throughout the boat a bit. So this one, we ended up cutting some defects off the end, and if we were to use it here, we would end up on top of the scarf. So we're going to take another board and run it through the thickness planer so we can get some more length to it, and we'll save this one and use it a bit later. Sometimes when you run the lumber through the thickness planer, you end up finding defects that you didn't see before that were hidden in the wood, and that's what ended up happening with this one. So we'll make up a little bit longer one, and then the rest of it seems like it'll work out, so we can spend the rest of the day getting the scarves done, and then either jumping in and working on the bronze floor or working on getting the sole beams attached. One or the other. That's all I got to get done.
me move that. Oh no, this isn't.
This one's almost kind of too nice to do this with, though. We'll find another one. I am hungry. I didn't eat much for breakfast. I'm gonna run in and grab a quick snack.
Yeah, that's why I grabbed that.
Feel free to follow the line.
You want me to? All right.
If you think you can follow
Yeah, I can follow the line.
That'll fit.
No, fit. That'll just fit.
Yeah, I think that one was only like a half an inch, so that one was 12 inches. Yeah.
Just nip like that off.
The big thing we needed to figure out now was how many more planks we wanted to do in oak before switching to cedar. We've got plenty of cedar. Although the oak is stronger, it is also far heavier and denser than the cedar. Moving, cutting, and backing out will all be so much easier once we switch.
The pile's not terribly easy to pick through. We don't have a forklift or any sort of machinery that we can move it around with. And we've picked all of the framing stock and the planking stock out of that pile. So the top like 2 or 3 layers at this point are not plank stock and are not frame stock. The layers below that are.
Yeah.
So to rip off those top layers to get to the lower ones it's a significant amount of work. And if we need to do it and grab the oak and put on the oak strake, then we'll definitely do it. I mean, we're not one to do something because it's hard work. I'm just trying to decide if it makes sense and it's warranted. We still need to get, I think, 6 sets of frames out of it, and then we got to be really picky with the framing stock.
Yeah.
So I also don't want to like steal too much of the good stuff for planking and then run out of framing stock.
Yeah.
It sure would be nice to start working cedar.
It sure would be. Much lighter.
It would also make a hell of a lot more room in our garage.
Yes. So what are you thinking?
Kind of leaning toward just putting on one more fishing straight with oak.
He doesn't even have bottom strakes as oak.
No, he just has it totally planked in cedar.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet the builders would have put a hardwood garboard on her.
I would have. I mean, I think what we did was the right call. Flip it over.
That was all that. Okay. Need another one on there.
Yeah.
Here, down here. We are taking a vacation, which is the first real vacation we've taken since we started the boat. So we decided that one, it was super hot back home, and we love you all and really appreciate all the support and the comments and everything that we get, but we're kind of big introverts, and the project is asking us to be very extroverted, which is fine and that's good. But every once in a while we need to check out and take a little break. So this is that break. So we're up here in the mountains, a couple hours north of us, and we're gonna do some alpine climbing. So we're gonna head over to that ridge today and do a 600-foot route that we've never done before. So we gotta just make our way across the talus field and through the brush over there, and then we'll either rappel the route or top out the ridge and hike down. We'll see what happens. But it'll be an adventure. I don't understand. I don't speak monkey. Or Waka.
You don't even know what
Wolf,
you're talking
or whatever
about.
that is you're speaking. You're not enjoying being in the boathouse with us, Akita? Is there somewhere else you'd rather be? Out chasing lady dogs, maybe? Yeah? You wanna go chase lady dogs?